Energy is the golden thread that connects economic development, social equity, and environmental sustainability. A statement made by the then Secretary General of the United Nations, Ban Ki-moon. I went to the Secretary General a few hours after he made that, and I said, with all the wars and all the conflicts going on, how do you have time to focus more of your personal time on energy than anything else? He had a very simple answer. When they have a modern, effective energy system, you don't have all those wars and conflicts. I'm working on the root cause. We have an outstanding panel today that's going to talk about why our energy system is working so well and created all those accomplishments we talked about yesterday, but also talk about the challenges of the future. There's what to do. And this is the most diverse panel around energy I think you'll ever see. We start at discovery. We go to generation, distribution, and then in use, both from a business standpoint and a consumer standpoint. You will walk away from here having a perspective I don't think you had to start with. Katie, Google has some of the best energy strategy group in the world, because my time at Shell, you know, we benchmarked you, and you're number one, and we went to visit to learn from you. Google chose Tennessee. Why?
So I think everyone's familiar with Google, but you may not know we have two large data centers in the Valley, one in Jackson County in Alabama and another in Clarksville, Tennessee, and have been here and called the Valley home since 2018. And the reason why we're here is really a testament to public power, which I am a huge fan of, and I'm going to take a minute to brag on. So when we were looking for our site, it was around the same time that TVA was retiring a coal plant in northern Alabama, Widows Creek. And so we were able to actually locate our data center at that site. We had a chance to visit that site a couple months ago and actually got to know the site manager, who was a former employee at the coal plant, and now he manages this big site with hundreds of people coming in and out every given day. And so to me, that was just like such a testament to the ability to partner together, where you take a situation where we are able to step in, reuse the infrastructure, and use those services to power the Google services that y'all use every day. And just the ability to innovate, I think, is really unique to the public power model, and something that Google has been so excited to be a part of. And then the other thing I'll say on innovation is, Google has a very strong perspective about how we want to power our operations and strong decarbonization goals. And so, since 2017, we've been powering all of our global energy use with renewable energy, but more and more we're focused on how can we invest in local clean energy that supports the grid. And so when we came here in 2018, we were able to partner with TVA to design a new program called Green Invest that allows large corporations to invest in solar power here in the Valley, and that has been an incredible success story too. So, I think those things really speak to the ways that you're able to have deep partnership here in the Valley that you really don't see in other places.
That's just great. And as preparing for this, I could tell you and your partner on the left, Jeff, at TVA, talk every day, it seems like.
Every day, yeah.
So there's a really
BFFs.
close relationship that's really key. So, Jeff, if I go to you next, and I hope everybody here appreciates the great value TVA brings to this state and what it's doing. You've been around for about 90 years, and you started with sustainability as a key aspect from day one. And so I know that's one key aspect of what you're doing. How do you manage this behemoth called the TVA?
Well, that's a great question. Let me start out by saying I'm really glad you're a fan of public power, and you're great. And Google is a great partner, and we talk just so frequently. And I think there's just a stream of ideas coming out of those discussions that I think have great potential. The public power model is unique. This one that we have here is unique, and what's powerful about it is. It is not about a shareholder, although I spent a lot of my career with investor-owned companies. It's about how do we make life better for the 10 million people that live here in the Valley. And 90 years ago, TVA was founded with a mission, and it'll go to your golden thread. Mission was really simple. It had three parts: energy, economic development, and the environment, right? And the notion that if you provide an affordable, reliable, resilient, clean power system, that energy makes everybody's life better, fundamental, and that will drive economic development, and you should do all of that with environmental stewardship front and center. So that was the mission 90 years ago. And I would not change a bit of that mission right now. As a matter of fact, I think those three things are so inextricably linked now, particularly going forward, that is more relevant than ever. The second comment I'd make here about, I mean, I can go into how you run the big business. I'm an engineer. I can bore you to death with what I do with respect to that every day. But one of the critical concepts in public power and running an organization like TVA is partnerships. And so as I'm sitting here on the stage, I just want to point out, these are all my partners I'm sitting with. So Google is a direct serve customer, and so we're partnering with them to understand the nature of their energy needs. What's the shape? What's the magnitude? What's the timing? What are the sources? And I want Google to understand my business so they can see what potential there is to hit the sweet spot. University system, Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt was one of the first Green Invest customers once we created the program. And University of Tennessee, Donde. We partnered together to try to understand policies. We and UT just did the Valley Pathways study to look at economy-wide carbon emissions and what are the most effective ways to drive economy-wide carbon emissions down. Because after all, that's the objective, isn't it? And the National Lab, Oak Ridge. We have a whole portfolio of common efforts from technology, research and development to entrepreneurship and business development. And I was just yesterday at the National Electric Service Board of Directors talking to them about what does the future look like and how are we going to partner with a local power company that distributes the power we generate. And so my fundamental question on how you run TVA is stay focused on that mission and make sure you got the right partners.
Fantastic. Very encouraging. Brent, Chief Customer and Innovation Officer. I hear the slogan you have is the art of the possible. That's not what you normally expect from an organization like NES. What's going on?
Yeah, that's right. So I was brought here 9 to 10 months ago, and like Jeff, I have about 18 years of IOU experience or investor-owned utility experience. Came to the municipal space because I do like the service model of what we do for the community, and we listen to customers, and that is first and foremost. At municipal utilities and all utilities, we have a real need to keep stability front and center. And I'm an engineer by trade, so I understand why that's really important. However, for us to get to the future for where customers want us to be, we have to innovate. And that art of the possible saying and that slogan is really to get us and my colleagues as engineers out of that kind of what won't work mindset into what's possible. How do we make this work? And it really comes down to kind of what we're doing now at NES through partnerships with TVA, that in the last several years, we have the partnership with Vanderbilt on a solar farm that is taking, and you don't want to steal your thunder, but we're proud of the partnership at Vanderbilt that there's a 70% reduction of their greenhouse gas emissions for us in our partnership with our community. We're rolling out an electric vehicle strategy to make sure we have charging capabilities across our community. That's another TVA partnership. Green Invest, we've allowed Nashville to be second in the Valley in renewable energy adoption through the partnerships that we have with TVA and some of the ones that we have with Music City Solar. So that innovation is really helping us think about what our customers want. How do we as a group of utility professionals that want to make sure we have reliability get out of our way in that way and make sure we really serve the customers well. So it's about listening more than anything, and I think that's the best innovation. Like Jeff mentions, listening to those of us that are TVA's customers, we're listening to our community and hearing what they really want from us, and that's the best innovation, is to figure out how to help customers utilize our services. And our last letter in our company's name is S, which is service. We have to serve, and that listening and helping us get to that service part. We'll take partnerships with both TVA and Google and all of our customers and our residential customers as well.
Oh, that's great. Stephen, we got a great introduction to Oak Ridge yesterday. Nice setup, you know. and I think everybody came away so impressed with the contribution you're making, the contribution to the future. What else would you add from your job leading the place?
So a couple things here. I think one thing that's very important about the Tennessee region, and this is difficult for somebody from Oak Ridge National Laboratory to say with a straight face, the area has critical mass. And I mean that in the good sense of the word, not the bad sense of the word. But the fact that Tennessee is a home where there really is a true public-private partnership between ORNL's National Laboratory, many of the industries here, particularly in the automotive industry, but manufacturing generally. TVA is a true partner, and I really respect that. They provide our energy. We work together to make sure that TVA can do that for the entire region. And the university environment here is fabulous. The collaborations that we have and the extent to which we can work together to solve challenges is enormous. I think one other thing that I would expand on the golden thread comment is the interlinkages are just becoming greater and greater. It's not just energy and economic and national security, it's food and water security, it's everything that we're doing in terms of the development of the world. One thing that we actually take for granted in the Tennessee area is that it takes energy to produce clean water, and it takes water to produce clean energy. And this region is actually blessed with plentiful resources. And actually, as somebody who's coming new to the region, the first thing that I used to think of when I thought of TVA was actually dams. Now I think of nuclear because I think that's really the future that will help us bridge a lot of the gap. First fission, but ultimately in about 25 years, I hope fusion. We'll hear more about that. But it really is a great place where that public-private partnership, I think, is making a huge difference.
Padma, you lead research at Vanderbilt, but you're a computer scientist of the top degree to start with. How does all that fit together with all this electricity generation?
Well, the computers, the supercomputers of today, Frontier, would not have been possible without energy efficiency being built into it from day one. And it sure uses a lot of megawatts, but it would have been, at least 20x more than that, meaning we could not have realized the computing. So when it comes to computing, energy is front and center, and that's true of all engineered systems, right? So you put energy where it can produce outcomes for you, and you have to be efficient about it. So I think that there's a very, very strong connection right there. But listening to everybody here around the table, I think at Tennessee we can give the country a capability no other state can give. And this is about thinking, decades long. What do we do for decades-long power? We've got fission, we've got fusion, we've got solar power, green power, but what do we do decades long? And I'm going to tell it with a story, okay? So, nuclear energy is produced using radioactive materials, and there's radioactive isotopes that are left behind. So one of the challenges in this connected world is how do you place sensors from the seabed to outer space? Because they need to be powered dependably for decades. So there's been a technology around since the 1960s, which is using radioisotopes and thermoelectric power generation, but it's never been efficient. It's clunky, big devices, you couldn't do that. Fast forward to a few years ago, Tyler Bernstein is one of our PhD students, and he works with our Institute for Space and Defense Electronics, where they've been trying to protect electronics from radiation. But somehow in that connection came this idea of greater efficiency. They used strontium, and they were able to prevent what's called breaking radiation, Bremsstrahlung, and that made for an efficient RPS generator, right? Within 2 years, they had a prototype. And then last fall, they were here visiting because we were thinking about what kinds of payloads do we put on the moon. And they said, you know what, we need to hook into Oak Ridge properly because they have got, they can solve our supply chain problem. You have the spent fuel. I reached out to Susan, she's right here in the audience, and she connected Tyler Bernstein with the right person. And earlier this year, they signed a contract with DOE by which the spent fuel is going to be used to produce these RPS systems. And I think there's more to come, right? You're going to hear from Governor Lee in just a little while. And the governor's made nuclear energy a priority for the state. And that means there's going to be incentives to bring back companies like Zeno back home. All this to say is that we are innovating now in energy systems, and we're going to continue to innovate. And we're going to shape the future of where these systems go, from the seabed to outer space.
Fantastic. We want to start focusing now more on what we need in the future. As we were preparing for this, Stephen, when I first talked to you, I was try to describe all the great things, and you didn't have much time for that. You said, we've got big issue here. If we don't start expanding, we will not have what we need. Could you kick off that discussion?
Yeah, we're in a very delicate place in the world. I think with the way that energy use is changing and it's coupling to the climate problem right now, there's an urgency that really rises to the level of what we saw with the Manhattan Project. Unless we get fusion, unless we get fission, unless we get renewables onto the grid, I start to fear about tipping points in climate where we see dramatic changes in climate that are just incredibly disruptive to the way that we live in the world, to food production, to water production and utilization, all the things that have kept the world at peace for the last decades. The world is becoming a much more interconnected place as well. Padma's already hit on this, but the cybersecurity, cyber-physical security aspects of what we're doing become increasingly important to both provide energy in an efficient and mindful way, but also to make sure that we're doing that in a safe and secure way. So linking all these things together in a way that we really understand what we're doing, not just from the standpoint as Jeff put out, of minimizing the carbon footprint across the whole of society, but also paying attention to the other knock-on effects in cybersecurity and everything else that we have to worry about. We have to focus on that now. It's an urgency that I don't think I've ever felt in my life before.
That's powerful. Now, how do you convince Brent's customers that they should go this way?
So there's a very simple argument you can do right now. If you look at Frontier, which Padma mentioned, it's peak operations. It's about a 25 megawatt machine. And that's about equal, it turns out, to the amount of energy that's used in the city of Oak Ridge each year. That just gives you a sense of how much energy we're utilizing. If you look at that and look at some of the things that Google is interested in, Frontier could train of the order of about, say, 3 to 5 large language models that are equivalent to ChatGPT each year. And that means that the world's fastest single supercomputer really can barely keep up with what Google needs right now. So, of course, Google's expanding their infrastructure. In aggregate, Google has way more processing power than we have with Frontier. But it just points out that the path we're on with modern technologies, with AI as an example, is just simply not sustainable. And if the nation is going to keep ahead in these strategies, we have to come up with new approaches to the most advanced technologies that are energy efficient and scalable so that we can deploy them in our best interest. And I think that's really the urgency. It's not just the climate change problem, it's the international competitiveness problem that keeps Google in business. And we like you being in business.
That's great. Katie, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I'd love to. I mean, I think there are a few things that are incredibly urgent about this moment that we're in. And, you know, I think for the first time in a while, we're seeing load demand grow on the grid and the grid struggling to sort of keep up with that. And, you know, I think we feel a sense of responsibility and obligation to make sure that we are doing our part. And so Google has been driving down our energy usage through energy efficiency for a long time. You can imagine this is a very nerdy company that loves to solve problems. And so actually, you know, the data centers that we build and operate are 1.5 times more energy efficient than the typical data center. And even compared to 5 years ago, we are getting 3 times as much computing power out of a given amount of electrical energy that you're putting in. And so, so our efficiency is growing, but we also are focused now on the flexibility side of things where, you know, we are piloting a new demand response program that allows, when the grid is strained, allows us to work with our utility partners and shift non-urgent tasks to other locations or other times in a way that doesn't impact the Google services that our customers are using, but that allows us to be a good partner to the grid when it's needed. And we know those urgent times when the grid is peaking are when we need to really be more flexible. And so we're pushing hard in that direction as well. But I think, too, the comments about the new technology that we don't have yet. You know, we are big fans of wind and solar. We've invested in these resources all over the world, really, in a lot of ways, sort of piloted this kind of corporate PPA model. But now we're kind of looking ahead, and we're seeing that what the grid is going to need in the next 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years to fully decarbonize is technologies that are not available today. It's advanced nuclear, it's next generation geothermal, it's long duration energy storage, it's things that are flexible, dispatchable, and clean. And so, recently we announced a new initiative between Google and Microsoft and Nucor, where we are signaling to the market that we have demand for these next generation technologies and trying to bridge that gap from R&D to commercialization. And I think there is a lot of excitement around that, and I think the Valley is going to be a big part of that solution and commend TVA's leadership on these technologies too. But I think we're all going to have a much deeper focus on partnership between corporations and utility providers and public policy to really get it there.
Fantastic. Jeff, you're the guy who's got to actually build all this stuff and get it out there. Enlighten
I
us.
lose a lot of sleep over this.
Please.
Yeah, well, let me start off by just a general observation. I think the next decades, maybe the next century, when you think about who's going to set the global agenda, I think it's going to be the country with the strongest economy, and I think that strength of economy, in very large part, will depend on the strength of the energy system that fuels that economy. And so that's how critical I think this topic is to competitiveness. One. Two, I think the outcome you really want to drive for is an energy system that is increasingly clean, driving towards zero carbon. Although as an engineer, I have a problem anytime you say zero is the only acceptable number. There's a point of diminishing returns here that we'll eventually have to recognize, I think, because occasionally the perfect stands in the way of the good, and I think that's a bit of where we are right now. But it's got to be clean. But beyond that, it's got to be reliable. It's got to be resilient. Reliability is what we have now. Resiliency is how you perform when the thing you didn't want to happen or didn't know would happen happens. You got to be able to recover. And it's got to be affordable, because if businesses and individuals can't afford it, the whole thing breaks down. That's the outcome we want to produce. And so, and the challenge is bigger than it's ever been. If you go back to 1950, about 2% of the energy you used in your life came from electricity. Today, it's more like 22%, and by 2050, it's going to be over 50% by any conservative measure. And so, when you are more reliant on a thing, your expectations go up, not down. So reliability, resiliency, this is the challenge. And I would tell you, we have an energy system, a power system, that is the best in the world. I've been around the world, and people will say, well, no. This is the best energy system in the world. But it took us 100 years to build this system. And now we have to revolutionize it and triple its size in the next 2 decades. So think about the magnitude of that challenge. And I think the key to that is being able to move past the one-dimensional solutions that everybody wants to focus on. I love renewables. I'm building as much as I can. Renewables is a tool, not an outcome, right? And so assembling all the right resources into this and inventing technologies that we don't have is so critical, to Stephen's point, to get us there. And I think the important thing is that we begin to have very honest conversations about the trade-offs, the balances, the technology investment, and the commitment it's going to take to do this. Because it's going to take wind and solar and long-duration energy storage and gas as a bridge and low-carbon fuels and preserving the nuclear fleet and new nuclear fission and nuclear fusion on the horizon. And it's going to take moving from the notion that it's a central power grid, not to a distributed power grid, but to both. So I need this guy to deploy energy storage at the distribution level, dynamic voltage control, demand response, energy efficiency that benefits his customers that I can dispatch. I need Google to shape their power so that we can plan for the 2 or 3 days a year when capacity becomes a critical constraint and not have to waste a lot of assets to meet that peak by shaping the demand, right? I need Google to figure out how to be more energy efficient with that next unit of computing power, because this transition in this power system's going to be a constraint if we don't focus on solving that issue.
Well, that's fantastic. So I know what NES needs to do. I know what Google needs to do. But if you were king for a day and could make one change for our energy system in the country, not just the state, what would you do?
Yeah, that's a really difficult question. I think if it wouldn't be a technology. The one change I would make is to get alignment among industry, research, academics, and government policy and the capital markets. Because a lot of these technologies that we have to develop have very high capital research, development, and deployment costs with very high risk. And we've got to understand how to develop them, how to deploy them, and how to bring that risk profile down to the point where our capital markets can deploy them within their risk appetite. Because if we can get there, we crush the competition. But getting aligned around that is the biggest challenge.
Oh, that's great. And that's a plug for our panel, because that's what we were trying to do today. So that's great. But Brent, what do your customers care about?
So this is a great question, and I thought of a lot as we were just listening to the conversation. I'm going to give 2 examples of something happened in my career that kind of shaped where I am today. The first was I was testifying in the state of Missouri at the state capitol on some energy decisions the company I was working at was making on shutting down a coal plant. NRDC was also giving some testimony about what they thought about how we should be treating that. And normally that's not a relationship that you leave the room and have a lot of time with each other. You know, those two don't work together all the time. I happened to walk out, and I am a little bit of a relationship person, so I took a bit of time to talk to the person that was testifying on their behalf. We ended up having about an hour-long conversation before we got in our cars and went our separate ways. In that conversation was the first time I really shifted my thinking into possibly having dispatchable load instead of having our dispatchable resources. And we really went into some theoretical planning of how you could possibly run a utility if you could get your customers to align with the utility in a way that we really work together. And the thought we had, and this is something he was much more advanced in his thinking than I was at the time on this, but I've really gone after this as a potential, is what if you could really work to, instead of having to reconductor lines on your distribution system, could you work with neighborhoods to change their load pattern to maybe get by another 10 years and not have to make that investment? Could we put battery storage? Could we utilize EVs as they get older, those batteries, could they become part of the system? That process has really kind of been that art of the possible conversation, because, you know, it's not the easiest to bring those up around a bunch of smart engineers at a utility that something's a little bit off the norm, you know? So how do we have that conversation internally, but also with our customers in a way they trust us? The second example I have in my career was about 10 years ago in the RTO that I was working in, we came up with a marketplace that all of us as utilities would put our generation into the marketplace, and then that RTO would tell us when to use our power, when we would put it into the system. At the time, we were all pretty, suspicious about how we would be told to use our power. We used to all have control of our own system and how we would serve our customers. Over time, that really became something that helped us save the amount of energy that was used. So the natural gas that we bought, the coal that we bought, it really made us be able to, as a company, and all companies, serve more reliably and reduce the overall impact on cost from a fuel and generation perspective. To now thinking about how does all of that work for those of us on the distribution side, I think what we have to do is something similar. How do we work with our customers to help them help us shift that load around in a way that's not too inconvenient and definitely not a discomfort? We need to continue to provide the comforts and what the customers want. A commercial customer has to still be able to be profitable. Our industrial customers have to make the products they need to make, but how do we work together in a way to help support TVA, not having to build as many facilities into the future? Because the cost and affordability is what customers will, in the end, really care about, but they also want those added features of renewable, clean, and reliable. So that is really the path we're on, and I think from just getting engagement with our community. If I was, well, you didn't ask me this, but if I was king for a day, I would make everybody get along and figure out how to work together. And I know that's really silly. And but how do we really trust that a utility like NES is doing what is right for the community in our ask in programs like demand response, in programs like energy efficiency? It's not about anything but helping us shape the future to where it will be more cost effective for everybody.
So how do you sell that to your customers? You have the passion, you believe in doing it, but now you got to get your customer to believe it.
So every survey that I've ever seen from customer satisfaction, the more that customers know somebody at a utility, the more increased that customer satisfaction is. So historically, when the utilities were small and knew a lot of their community, they would get those high scores from those people that answered that knew an employee. We are doing our best to be the humans that we are out in the community. So we go to a lot of events to be aware of what's going on in the community. We do neighborhood meetings. Our social media presence is an attempt to modernize that human feel, but I don't know how we do it right with almost 500,000 customers to make sure that we really are people to our customers, because that's the truth. We have a bunch of, we have 1,000 employees who really care about serving our community in a way that matters to our end-use customer. And so that is, and I have communications in my responsibility as well, so that is probably, I don't have the perfect answer for it, but I am thinking, how do we humanize it?
But I bet Google does.
There we go.
So I love this conversation, and when you were talking, it made me think about the experience that we've had with Nest Thermostat, which is a Google company, where we've been able to use AI and create a product. Because I think, to your point, consumers, they do want to be more energy efficient. They do want to be part of the solution, but not everybody is sort of like wants to live in the tech world of like checking my solar panel production every day, and like there are some folks like that, and a lot of them work at Google. But there are a lot of people who are not that way, including most of the people that I know. But I think the opportunity to marry technology with some of these problems to allow consumers to be part of the solution in a way that really is in the background for them. Like, I think, we have seen incredible electricity bill and consumption savings just from these Nest thermostats that, sort of naturally adjust to people's usage, turn down when you leave the house, all of that. And I think it's an opportunity where you have these new technologies and you can deploy them at scale in partnership with utilities like NES. I think you can really start to see those impacts in a big way.
That's right. So we'll need your help, because there are two different ways we're looking at this. There's the discussion of a digital twin, and we're looking at that of how we run our power system. So there's a digital twin model that we can plan our work in a way that is not experimenting with real crews doing this. We can actually model that, and model after model figure that out. But the digital twin that I'm curious about is, what about all the wearables we have? What about the room comfort you want? How do you get those smart devices to keep you comfortable, but know what settings would save you the most money and save the company the most energy? Those are things that I think the Googles of the world will find those solutions faster than a utility will. But we'll be quick to follow if somebody solves that in a way that we can serve our customers better.
I think that's where partnership becomes so valuable, because the hours where that has the most value, and we can partner with companies that have the technology that allows that to scale. So, lots more work to do there.
Yeah, let me add a comment. So there's this whole suite of demand-side management technologies that I think has huge potential, and the potential is a couple of fold. One, it can really help shape the power system and make that load a variable resource that we can dispatch. And we've never really, we've dabbled at this in the power industry, so there are plenty of great programs out there. It's never been universal, and I think we have to get there, because that is key. And in doing that, it engages the customers in understanding how important that energy is, what its nature is, and how it gets shaped. I think that all by itself has value. But one of the things I want to bring us back to is, but if I deploy 100% of that, when I hold that up against this future energy requirement, it's not enough. And so we have to do all that. I want to accelerate that. I don't want to slow it down. But the fundamental research and development around these energy sources, storage, low carbon fuels, carbon capture, fission, fusion, we should be urgent about that. We should be investing in that. We should be helping, as a government, build the first of a kind, bring the risk down, and get it scalable. Because if we do all the other things that we're capable of doing, we will run through that opportunity by the mid-2030s, and we'll be staring at a blank wall. We need to have technologies that can pick up the baton in about 2035 and run us through a finish out in 2050.
Great point. Padma, Stephen brought up the fact that the energy system and water system are interlinked. I would say the energy system and information systems are interlinked. Would that be close?
You are spot on. I think, energy is like a horizontal, right? It makes so many sectors possible. I think computing and AI is very similar. We are not thinking of it quite that way, but I think this is the moment, right? We can put AI everywhere. And along with that comes software and security, right? Because we're starting to have vehicles connected to the grid. What's connecting them? Software. Security becomes, important. Information becomes very important because the kinds of demand-supply matching, we cannot do that without the information, right? So I think Tennessee is in a unique place, right? Because we can address both of these. We can do energy innovation as well as computing and AI innovation, and I think we can do it together in real-world settings that show how we can change the arc 20 years down the road. Because there's lots of kinks to be worked out, right? It sounds simple, but it's not. And it's not simple exactly, Jeff, for the point you made. We have the best energy systems in the world. So now you take that very powerfully engineered system and you're trying to inject into it a total transformation, more supply, more demand, more distributed, and then we're adding software to it. So as you said, it does worry you a bit, but it's also a huge opportunity. And I think Tennessee is in a unique place to address this, unlike any other state, because we have both of these competencies. And it's there across the board among all our partners, among all our sectors.
Stephen, you're relatively new to the state, about a year or so?
6 months.
6 months? So what have you observed here that we may not see about ourselves?
So I think we've hit on a lot of it. I think one of the things I touched on earlier is we actually have abundant water, and that's something we take for granted, which is really great. There's another part of this which we haven't really touched on. We've talked a lot about use. We've talked a lot about generation. There's the link between those, which is transmission. And I think everybody's familiar with the old joke that all politics is local. All energy use is local, too. We've got to get the power from where it's produced to where it's actually consumed. And the transmission networks that we have in the U.S. are also in need of tremendous investment. The networks here in Tennessee actually do fairly well in that regard. The weather here helps. I think one of the things we always have to keep in mind is, depending on the part of the country you're in, the part of the world that you're in, the energy mix will be different because, in particular, renewables will work better or worse. It turns out one of the problems we have in East Tennessee, I believe, is just simply that wind and solar are not particularly good options in that part of the state. So we have to look for other solutions there. West Tennessee is a different example, even just within one state. We know that we have issues in the U.S. because of the fracturing of the grid between different parts of the U.S., trying to develop a better interconnect system and better synchronization, better operation of that entire grid will help. But the problems that we face here are very different than the problems that we face in other parts of the world. This will make Jeff feel good. One of the stories I'll tell about SLAC National Accelerator Lab, where I was before I came to ORNL, it turned out the bottleneck in power between SLAC and Stanford and Pacific Gas and Electric was actually a single transmission line underneath an intersection on Alameda de los Pugas. That one intersection brought down both SLAC and Stanford on more than one occasion. Another part of the transmission story of SLAC, which actually speaks to some of the difficulty, when the lab was built in the 60s for the linear accelerator there, which is a huge power consumer as well, it turned out that the way that they got the transmission corridor to serve SLAC is Lady Bird Johnson went door to door asking for permission. So that's the sort of political power that it sometimes takes to get some of these things solved. And we just can't do that anymore. We need better public solutions that will allow us to make the investments that we need at the speed that the nation needs, and allow us to de-risk the technologies as well. And I think that's one of the key factors for the national laboratories, is helping de-risk technologies through these public-private partnerships.
Stephen, I would tell you, my comment earlier about if we could focus on alignment, I want to go to this, is that as we sit here, TVA is building solar, storage, gas, we're developing nuclear, we're building transmission. And as I'm sitting here, we're litigating every single one of those, right? Every one of them is opposed. And so there is no solution that is unopposed. And so aligning around the right mix and making sure we have the fortitude to drive these things through to existence is really important. I wouldn't, huge fan of the technologies that we've been talking about and their development and deployment. We also can't forget about, as Stephen points out, re-engineering some basic technologies, because I think there's huge potential there. I'll give you an example. A few years ago, we invested in some companies, and one of the companies we invested in was looking at developing a new transmission conductor. It's always true on this power system that the constraint is the wire. We can increase the size of breakers and transformers quite easily. You can't increase transmission capacity without building a whole new line, without taking a right-of-way and condemning property. And so just yesterday, I was in California, and I was at looking at the facility of that company, who now has developed a conductor that we have in the field testing that can carry 4 times the amps with the same amount of issue. So that means we could potentially double or triple the carrying capacity by reconductoring transmission, and has the potential, as strategically laid out, to open a huge amount of capacity for us. Now, there's work to be done. How does that behave as it ages? What are the failure modes of it? And so we have work to do. But the reason I point this out is because even research and development into something as simple and passive as a wire can have profound effects and make us much more competitive. And so, one of the questions to my team is, okay, so we've opened that bottleneck. What is the next one standing right behind it?
That's great. So you mentioned what I call permitting, the legal challenges. It seems to me that's a bigger problem than we've ever seen before. Are there any solutions to that?
Yeah, it is very difficult. I would tell you one of the solutions has to be public education. So we have to do a much better job now of educating people on the energy system, its criticality, and why we need to do these things and what the benefit is. And I think, like it or not, the public is going to have to get used to the notion that there's a greater good here that we have to make sure we're serving, and we have to get on with it. I think there is reform in regulation and permitting that should make things much more simple. If I'm retiring a coal site and building a much less environmentally intense asset on that site, including solar and battery, the permit should be easy. It is not. It is the same level of difficulty. And if you take away nothing from today from me, I would tell you that it requires thought leaders and policymakers to align around the critical nature of this challenge and the need to do these things and support it when the going gets difficult.
And I would add to that, just really supporting it, about the only thing that the fusion industry fundamentally agrees on is that the permitting can't look like fission. So we got to do something different, absolutely.
Brett, if we got to get the consumers supporting the permitting, that seems to be your job. How are you going to do that?
It is all of our job, for sure, yeah, but absolutely. So one thing, everything is local to everybody, but also we also have to understand this is everywhere. And I've been here almost a year in Nashville, but where I worked was where all of the wind was coming into, well, most of the wind in the country was really coming into the market, which is Kansas and Oklahoma and then some Texas. But we were dealing with transmission line issues that were frequently constrained, that were causing high costs for a lot of customers. I worked at a utility that made a decent amount of revenue on running power plants to just push against that wind to put it in other places. We have to understand this is a nationwide issue. It's not just happening here. I think sometimes we think this is an issue with TVA or this is an issue with NES. And so somehow, with the idea that we are facing the challenge and going to work to fix it, we also have to understand this is everywhere that we're dealing with this. The growth is at a rate that we all have to figure out that next level of service. We also have to figure out how do we do this together. And one, I would love for all of us to figure out how to make Tennessee, that leader like we're talking about today, that competitiveness, everybody's dealing with it. How do we come together and make this a solution that really shows how you can come together and make it? That transmission piece, I don't envy Jeff. That was my first 10 years of my career, was building power lines and figuring out how to site those and how to figure out to get people on board with a project. And that was always tough, no matter where you were. So I think getting people to understand that all of these projects are for the greater good and to buy into that, that is our job when it is in our footprint. But also across the state, if we could support some of those things as they're coming about, so that we all know, TVA is doing that for the good of the region, for the good of the areas they serve.
And being the art of the possible person, you seem optimistic we can do that?
I do. So this is kind of an interesting thing. I see, that how many challenges we've overcome as a country, and I look back when I started my career, the power lines that were on big pieces of paper that people drew without PLS CAD, without a technology to do that. And I went out and measured some of the lines where that sag came in, and that's something you do to make sure there's enough clearance over the ground. Those lines that were built in the 40s, I went out in 2003 and measured, and based on the temperature, that line was exactly where it was supposed to be. So a 161 kV line built that many years ago, it was put in like it was supposed to be. I don't know how they figured that out without the tools that I got to have in my career, but I think we can really continue to improve in a way that's just always surprising us as humans as we make things better. Our challenges are probably more unique than maybe ever, but I have to imagine that somehow building those long lines without technology had to be a real challenge as well. And so I think we'll get there. I think in the next 5 to 10 years, with the rate of change with AI, we're going to be running a distribution system much different than we were just 2-5 years ago. I think that's where stuff comes together, where we really do find solutions. And as a utility, I want us to find that solution faster so that customers don't have to try to find those on their own and have to figure out how to do something maybe more unique than they want to have to deal with. So I want us to be that solution provider.
That's great.
Jan,
Jeff?
how can you not be optimistic? Right? I mean, this is a huge opportunity. I'm reminded as you're talking about the founder, one of the founders of my industry, Thomas Edison. I recall he said, people often miss opportunity because it's dressed in overalls and looks like hard work. And that's what we're facing here.
And it was also after a big failure that Thomas Edison had one of his great inventions. 3 weeks after his house and area burnt down, I think the phonograph was invented in his, it was 3 weeks later. So it was through challenge, and I don't think that day, there's a story about that day that he looked to his wife and said, all right, all of our mistakes are gone now. And for whatever that's worth, he was able to pull forward and create another invention in 3 weeks. So I think the challenges we face, the opportunities are there. I think we're going to see us really rise above, but it's not like without challenge, like we said.
We have just a couple minutes left, but the people in this room can make a difference, and so let's go down, and each panel member, any message you have for the people in this room that you want to share with them to make sure they don't miss it. Stephen?
So in the mobility sector, I think one of the things that we missed there is just energy utilization is huge in the mobility sector, and I think through very hard work through a lot of the people in this room, we actually have sort of the light-duty transportation. We've got a path for that with electric vehicles. The issue is really heavy-duty transportation, marine, and aviation. That's where the future effort's going to need to be. And Tennessee, in the way that we brought the automotive industry here, has a role that we can play there. So I think there's a growth opportunity for all of us in that space.
Tennessee, I guess, is the volunteer state, but we're also the partnership state, and we're also pioneers. And I think we can, get ahead of these challenges, and I think we'll work together to do that. So the message I have is, let's work together. We can make it happen.
I'll just encourage folks in the room who are coming at this kind of from a corporate leadership perspective. I think this is an incredible moment for us to be partnering very intentionally to look at what the electric system of the future could be, and not just in terms of conversation, but in terms of investment in the future of the grid. So, we are very eager for partners in that space and excited about the conversations there.
Yeah, I would, I'd ask the folks in the group, don't allow the conversations about energy to be fractured with each person advocating their favorite thing. Force it to be a diverse portfolio, a balanced solution, and all of the above. Always bring the conversation back to that. And the second point is your point. This can't be done without deeper, broader, more effective partnerships between academic institutions, power companies, industrial customers, local power companies and retail customers, and policymakers. Partnership in a much broader and deeper way is the only way to solve this.
And if I understand Tennessee history a little bit, I might get something wrong, but I think it was Senator Howard Baker that said, "You might be right," to people across the aisle or in conversations you might have. There's also a podcast in Tennessee of two former governors that have a podcast that is the very conversation. That's the conversation we have to have often so we don't get fractured, because there's times I have an opinion about how things have to be done because of my experience, because of the work I'm doing, and it's hard to hear another side of the story that somebody has a complete opposite opinion. That idea that somebody else might be right is something hard for all of us to think of. I encourage all of us just to think, how do we not fracture? How do we come together and really make this something we're all trying to solve?
Brett, that's a great place to leave it. Please thank our panel for their work.